In 1967, Muhammad Ali was driving through a segregated Birmingham neighborhood when a single act of kindness triggered a profound transformation behind a closed front door. It was April 19th. Ali, aged 25, was merely days away from the historic moment he would refuse induction into the U.S. military, a decision that would ignite a firestorm of political controversy across the nation. He was in Alabama for a speaking commitment, riding in a car chauffeured by his longtime associate, Curtis Webb. As they navigated a quiet residential area, Ali's sharp eyes caught something: a tiny girl, isolated and sobbing on the sidewalk. He commanded the driver to reverse. The child was just 6 years old, wearing a yellow dress and missing one shoe. She was utterly lost, overwhelmed by the crushing fear that only a young child knows when they realize they are alone. Ali stepped out, physically lowering himself to her level. He didn't just tower over her, he knelt down to bridge the gap. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She was Katie, and she was terrified. She couldn't find her way home. Ali didn't panic. He calmly asked for landmarks. She mentioned a red mailbox and a brown dog named Biscuit. With that simple mission, they began a slow-speed search of the area. For nearly 20 minutes, they canvassed the streets until the young girl pointed toward a familiar house. When they reached her doorstep, her father, Robert Holloway, answered the door. He had been frantic, searching for his daughter, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and relief when he saw her standing there, safe and sound, with the most famous, and to many, the most polarizing man in the country. Holloway invited the boxer inside. The living room was a space decorated with symbols of the status quo, including a framed portrait of Robert E. Lee. As they sat and spoke, the air in the room shifted. Holloway, a man who had previously harbored deep prejudices and openly voiced support for segregationist policies, realized his worldview was crumbling. He confessed his past views to Ali, admitting he likely wouldn't have stopped to help a stranger if the roles were reversed. Ali simply looked at him and said, "Maybe now you should." In a quiet, monumental act of change, Holloway stood up, removed the portrait of Robert E. Lee from his wall, and placed it out of sight in a closet. He had replaced a hateful ideology with a human connection. Decades later, that little girl, Catherine, shared the story. She grew up to be a teacher, dedicating her life to stopping for children who need help, a legacy of compassion she traced back to that afternoon. Her father never boasted about that day. It remained a private, sacred memory of the moment he finally understood his own humanity. The story was never recorded in Ali's official biographies. It lived on only through the memories of a little girl and the silent transformation of a father who decided that the person standing in his living room was worth more than the dogma on his wall. Have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger's kindness fundamentally changed your perspective? Tell us your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about the hidden, human side of icons.
What remains, 50 years after the fact, is the quiet resonance of a single, unrecorded decision. History books fixate on Muhammad Ali's public battles, his thunderous performance in the ring, and his vocal stance against the draft, the massive, tectonic shifts that shook the global landscape. Yet, this story reminds us that history is often anchored by the small, private moments that occur when the cameras are off and the public eye is elsewhere. The absence of this account in his biographies only adds to its weight. Ali didn't use the event for a press release or a campaign talking point. He simply returned a child to her father and moved on to his next obligation. For him, the act was not a performance. It was an extension of his own moral intuition. Consider the ripple effects. Robert Holloway's choice to keep the encounter private for the rest of his life suggests that the transformation was not about seeking external validation or performing a moral correction for an audience. It was about reconciling his own internal world with the reality he had witnessed in his living room. He had to live with the man he had been and the man he had become in the span of an afternoon. Then there is the teacher. Catherine Holloway didn't just learn a lesson about kindness. She adopted it as a professional and personal mission. Her decision to become an educator for nearly 3 decades, focusing on the children who needed someone to stop for them, is a tangible, living legacy. Every student she helped, every child she mentored, and every life she touched in her classroom was, in some small way, a direct result of that moment on a Birmingham curb in 1967. We spend so much time debating the abstract, the other who lives on the other side of a cultural or political divide. We are often encouraged to see those we disagree with as symbols or caricatures, but true change rarely survives the presence of a real, breathing human being. Once that abstraction is replaced by a face, a name, and a shared experience, like a red mailbox or a dog named Biscuit, the barriers we build begin to lose their structural integrity. Robert Holloway, a man who once believed in a specific version of his world, found that his foundation could not withstand the simple, human grace of a stranger. That empty space on his wall served as a permanent reminder of the day he chose humanity over heritage. This is the hidden architecture of history, not the loud, monumental events, but the quiet, everyday instances where people decide to be better than they were yesterday. It serves as a challenge to us all. In a world that often demands we be defined by our loudest beliefs, who would you be if you actually stopped to look at the person in front of you? Sometimes, the most significant change isn't what we add to our lives, but what we finally decide to take down. The transformation that unfolded in that living room was not fueled by speeches or grand, televised debates, but by the quiet, grounded reality of two men sitting across from one another. Muhammad Ali, a man frequently framed by the media as a volatile and dangerous figure, sat on a couch in a home that had previously been a sanctuary for views completely antithetical to his own. Robert Holloway was not just a father who had been reunited with his lost child. He was a man witnessing his own biases evaporate in real time. The man who had been a symbol of everything he was told to fear had just returned his daughter to him with the tenderness of a neighbor. When Holloway removed that photograph from his wall, he wasn't just performing a physical chore, he was performing an internal excavation. He was clearing out the clutter of years of societal conditioning. He would later tell his wife the truth about why that space on the wall was suddenly bare, a decision that carried significant weight in the atmosphere of 1967 Alabama. For 40 minutes, the air in that house was thick with the weight of unspoken realizations. They spoke of the city they both occupied but lived in from vastly different worlds. It wasn't a scripted conversation about civil rights or politics. It was a conversation about what humans owe to one another simply because they share the same ground. Catherine Holloway's reflection, shared half a century later, acts as the anchor for this story. She didn't recount a political lecture. She recalled a man who knelt, a man who saw her, and a man who acted when everyone else was passing by. She became a teacher, choosing to spend her life mirroring the very grace she was shown as a 6-year-old in a yellow dress. That afternoon, a legend wasn't fighting for a title. He was fighting for the dignity of a lost child, and, in doing so, he disarmed a man who had been taught to hate him. It serves as a reminder that the most radical thing you can ever do is choose to see the person standing in front of you instead of the abstraction you've been told to believe. Sometimes, the world changes not in the streets or at the ballot box, but on a quiet Tuesday, in a living room where a man decides to take down a picture, look at a stranger, and finally choose to see the truth.